What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Bronx Pinstripe Show. Today, joined by friend of the podcast, Andy Martino. Andy, welcome back.
Hey, Andrew. How you doing? Thanks for having me.
Of course, always fun to talk to you. For a while this baseball season, the Yankees and the Mets were ruling the baseball worlds. You know, through the first half of the season, it looked like we were on track for a Subway Series. Things have changed in the last month to 2 months. What are your thoughts on I guess the season overall so far for those two teams?
Yeah, stumbling to the finish line in both cases a bit. Although it changes day to day or week to week, weekend to weekend. The Mets looked great a few days ago. As we tape this, they've just lost 2 in a row to the lowly Cubs. I actually think bouncing back and forth between the two teams, Andrew. I mean, first of all, you never know what's going to happen in the postseason. Obviously, baseball makes no sense. Predicting is a fool's errand. But as of today, it's one of the first times that I can ever remember covering the Yankees and the Mets where it does feel like the Mets are on more solid ground right now than the Yankees. Just for right now, for this season, I just think their problems are less severe. I think when Met fans get all stressed about their offense having a bad day or even a bad series, I'm like, guys, have you watched the Yankees in the second half of this year? So again, baseball's unpredictable enough where you could drop the Royals in the postseason and they might win a round or two just because baseball makes no sense. So I'm not saying who's better equipped for an October run. I'm just saying that I feel that right now the Yankees' problems run deeper. It has a lot to do with injuries in their defense, but it has to do with other stuff too, which I'm sure you guys have seen and agonized over. So that's what I'm seeing right now is that they both look like world beaters for a while early on, like you said, Andrew. But now I would be a little bit more concerned about the Yankees side.
It was glaringly obvious when last week against the Twins, they trotted out a lineup of Aaron Judge and the Scranton Rail Riders.
Yeah.
That's basically what the lineup was. I mean, they still won that series against the Twins because, I don't know, the Twins just cannot beat the Yankees for whatever reason. But yeah, they certainly have their fair share of problems. When you say the Mets are on more solid ground, I think it's interesting because I also feel, and you know, this is from a Yankees fan outside Mets, outsider to the Mets, but I have some Mets friends and I'm getting this vibe from them. For the first time in a long time, they also have a solid foundation in ownership and manager, which has not been the case for a long time. So even when they've had a good team on the field, there's always been that cloud hanging over the Mets. It's like something's going to happen here because we don't have that owner and manager that we can fully trust. But this year with Cohen and Showalter, I feel like it's finally falling into place.
And Sandy Alderson, I think, in that president role has been good. Mets have come a long way in the past 2 years in establishing a foundation for what's to come. But again, these narratives can come and go. We were having this conversation a year ago. You had the first 2 GMs under the new regime let go for personal off-the-field reasons. You had Javi Baez and Lindor giving the fans a thumbs down. So it's been a great year for the Mets. But and they're in good shape. Look, going forward, they're going to outspend the Yankees, I think, regularly. And that's something that is going to take some getting used to in New York for sure. So, yeah, there are definitely a lot of positive things that have happened for them overall. But, again, you never know. They've had a lot of things that have gone right for them this year. Is lost to free agency. You have no idea how things are going to break from one year to the next for them or for any team. But definitely Steve Cohen and Sandy Alderson and Billy Epler this year have brought stability. Buck Showalter, too, although I think Luis Rojas was an underrated manager for them. But Buck's been terrific as well. Buck's been terrific.
It will be interesting with the Yankees. Like you mentioned, the Mets outspending them. I think a lot of Yankees fans have come to grips with that. And I guess a lot will depend on what happens with Judge in the offseason. If he signs with the Giants or the Dodgers or something for more money than the Yankees offer him, people are going to be pissed, rightfully so. He's by far and away their best player. So I think a lot will depend on that. I don't see the Yankees letting him walk because I just don't think they could swallow that PR hit. But it'll be interesting if the Yankees do fizzle out this year after it being so good in the first half, what the reaction will be towards Hal for the maybe not spending all that he could, and for Cashman for the moves he made at the deadline, and obviously for Boone. I think I've said this on the show. a dog could have managed the first half Yankees. They were getting 7 innings out of their starting pitching. Their bullpen was elite, and their offense was scoring 6 runs a game. It's hard to lose games that way. So I think those 3 pieces will have a lot of questions if the Yankees fizzle out in the playoffs yet again.
In terms of whether they'll be back, the team leadership,
Well, I mean, Hal's not going
right.
anywhere, obviously.
But aside from, he'll have decisions to make. I don't think it's a sure thing that Brian Cashman's back next year. In fact, I know it's not a sure thing.
That's what I'm saying.
I'm not trying to create a big story by saying, ooh, Cashman might not be back. I'm just saying he's not under contract. I talk to people in that organization all the time that are relevant to this decision, and there have been no discussions. If there's been a decision, it's been made very privately with Hal and his siblings, and it hasn't been shared outside that circle. I think that you have to consider it more likely than not that they'll bring back Cashman because that's what he's always done. And how I understand this is a point that's contrary to critiques of Cashman that are valid that are more like micro things or specific things to a particular season or particular trade deadline. But Hal knows that his franchise hasn't had a losing record since 1992. Right? 92 or 93. And no other team. The Cardinals, so that's 30 winning seasons. The Cardinals have had 14, about to clinch 15, I believe. So making a change is something that they'd have to do very, very carefully. Like, can we find someone else that's going to bring us that kind of historic run of success year in and year out? Having said all that, look, I think if you blow a 15.5 game lead in the division, all bets are off. Looks like that's not going to happen. So... But
what happens if you lose in the first round of the playoffs? Fine, you somehow stumble your way to the division. It's hard to blow a 15-game lead, so fine. You clinch the division, but you had a 720 winning percentage at one point deep into this season. If you get bounced in the first round yet again, I'm sorry, there's no difference between that and blowing the division in my mind.
That's fair critique, and I'm sure most fans will feel that way. I think if you're making the decision of who's going to run the team, boy, it's more than just figurehead Cashman. So Hal would have to decide, first of all, the number one question would be who's out there available that's better. That's always the question anytime you're firing anybody, right? And who can you actually get this offseason that's better? And second, are you replacing the entire infrastructure that they've built up? Are you promoting from within? And if you're promoting from within, what's the point of change? It's just not as simple.
So the last thing you were talking about was like the infrastructure beneath Cashman. So if you want to just start that point over, I think like the last clear thing I heard you say was Michael Fishman in the analytics department. So we can edit it in so it sounds seamless.
So you have Michael Fishman in the entire analytics department, which has been built up to more than 24 people. If Cashman's gone, are you getting rid of all of those people? I mean, if you bring in just a new figurehead for the department that Cashman spent all these years building, are you changing anything, really? Are you changing anything if you promote from within if Cashman's not there? Are you completely toppling everything that's been built and identify the Yankee infrastructure and bringing in somebody with an entirely different process who's going to hire assistant GMs and bring in his own analytics people and his own scouts and rebuild the organization in a month or two before the offseason? So these are the things that if you're an owner, you have to really think about. The Mets ran into this problem last year. Their whole offseason was delayed because they were looking for a GM, and they've still been kind of trying to retool the organization on the fly. With decent results, but still, you have to think, if it's not Cashman, is it someone who's already there? Is it someone who's from external? And it brings all kinds of questions either way.
That's a completely fair point. Getting rid of Cashman, if you're not going to going outside of the organization to replace Cashman is basically hitting the reset button on everything. And I don't know that the Yankees are prepared to do that with the current roster they have, assuming Judge is back. If Judge isn't back, I don't know really what this team can do next year. I mean, he's that important to this. So I think, I'm putting a lot of stock into what happens with Judge in the offseason. But it's interesting because your point on they haven't had a losing season since the early 90s. I do believe that is Hal Steinbrenner's, thinking is that we're this sounds like one of these like fan overreactions. It's like we're fine
Mhm.
competing, we're fine making the playoffs, but we're not going to do everything in our power to win a championship. And I know that's a cliche, and I know people love to say the old boss would have gone, made changes, and all he wanted to do was win a championship. But I can honestly say, having followed this team day in and day out for the last 20 years and seeing the last 10 years of Hal, I do truly believe he's more concerned with running a stable and competitive organization than he is building a championship team. Now, that might be unfair. You're closer to the team. Plenty of people are closer to the team than I am. But that's
Well,
my
and you're entitled
opinion.
to it, and I'm not inside his head, and I can't personally speak to that. I will say this: uh, the I was thinking about this. It's relevant to the Derek Jeter ceremony with the core four on the field last Friday, because I was thinking that Derek Jeter is the last Yankee icon who will have had a championship run like that, and multiple championships in a row. Of the run that started with like Ruth and Gehrig, I think Jeter's the last, because no team has won as you well know, no team has won consecutive championships since the 2000 Yankees. I think it's just such a different game, with the expanded wild cards being the primary reason, that I just think that, when the Yankees hear you haven't won a championship since '09, they say, and the White Sox haven't since '05. What the fuck? Like, why are you talking about us? It's like, it's this,
Yeah.
and it's a shame. It's almost like, so it's like Jeter comes from a different century, like literally and metaphorically. And it's just, they're trying, I do believe they're trying to win championships. And I know you do too.
Oh yeah.
I also believe that inside any organization, the dirty secret is that if you're in contention every year, that's more profitable and better as in your for your business than necessarily like going all in. But the Yankees vehemently argue that they're in their top three payroll this year. I think they're third at the moment, behind the Mets and Dodgers.
No one wants to hear them talk
You
about the
want to be
top
number
three
one,
payroll though,
right?
because it's not even that I care, or I don't care if they're number one. It's I care that they will make the right financial
Mm-hmm.
decisions for the team. And if that means being number one, then be number one. If that means being number seven, be number seven. So that's really my standpoint. And I just think there's some moves that they've made, especially in this offseason, where they
Mm-hmm.
did add payroll. It was just like kind of questionable where they added payroll and where
So are
they
you
chose not to
questioning
add
whether they're
payroll.
trying to win a championship, or you're questioning the decisions that they make to that end? Right.
Yeah, more the decisions. I do believe they're trying to win a championship. I'm not sitting here like naively saying that Brian Cashman is
No, I
trying to
know. I'm
throw
not taking it
like
that way,
by
but in
make
terms of the
by
organization, it's like you have every right, of
yeah.
course, as do I, to criticize like a move or a group of moves or a strategy, and you have every right to criticize anything they do, of course. I just think that they're trying to win. They haven't succeeded, obviously, in quite a while to win a championship, but uh, that's the game today. No one else has, and I don't think the Yankees will ever, ever, ever again have a run like they did in the '70s and '90s.
You're right. It's unrealistic. I guess the closest thing in recent is the early
Giants, yeah,
2010s Giants, but they went every other year. They
yeah.
missed the playoffs in between those championships. So like if you're thinking about like a team icon, Buster Posey winning those three championships for the Giants is probably
Yeah,
the
and for the
closest thing.
Giants fans, I'm sure it's equal to how Yankee fans think of Jeter. And the Giants of that, it's a great point, because the Giants of that era are the best argument against what I just said, that dynasties are essentially over. Because you could consider that a dynasty, probably. Um, but
It depends who you're arguing
sure,
with, Humphrey.
which I recommend against in every case. But they were able to accomplish those three championships, of course. Um, Someone will win back to back at some point. It's not like it's never going to happen again. But I just think what the Yankees did during that time was so special, and in the '90s, I mean. And there are so many more teams in the playoffs, just like ever increasingly,
Right.
that it's just such a meat grinder to get through. mean, you look at teams that seemed like dynasty-esque recently, like forget cheating for a second, the
The
Astros, right? One
Astros.
World Series. Look at the Dodgers.
Yeah.
It's funny because covering the Mets, they want to be the East Coast Dodgers. For all their success, the Dodgers only won one
Yeah.
bullshit pandemic World Series. That might change in a month or so, But you know what I'm saying? Like, what if you're a Dodger fan? Are you
Yeah.
happy with the last decade? Probably, but might have the same complaint in a way.
Yeah. I guess if you're the Yankees fan and like someone's saying, well, the Dodgers only have one bullshit championship, but you look at what they do with their roster and they spend and they spend and they spend and they seemingly don't have any shortage of young talent coming through that system. And they'll go out and they'll sign Freddie Freeman. They'll give Mookie Betts exactly what he's worth on the open market. And they do all those things. And then if you're a Yankees fan, you say, well, why aren't you doing those things as well? Because this organization is more than capable of doing it.
This is what I think. I think that the Yankees are going to win championships once in a while from now on. I think that the planet will die and none of it will matter eventually.
Okay, well,
that's
well then what the fuck are we doing here then? Like, no. I mean, this is what we talk about. This is what we choose to occupy our time with.
I think we have an existential kind of change in what's in the game and how hard it is to win championships. And I think that there's absolutely no problem with, as a fan or even as an owner, wondering what the Yankees would look like under a different structure of leadership after all these years. But if you're actually making the decision, going back to what I started this with what would be better. And I know you're like, well, I don't want to, like, in some ways that shuts down the conversation. Well, what will be better? I don't know. Go find something better if you're Hal. But this has been pretty good. I really think,
of course,
that the 30-year streak of winning, well, Brian Cashman's been there, is remarkable. And I'll tell you, when I talk to, I think part of the reason, Andrew, here's a point I'll make that maybe isn't made enough. Part of the reason why there seems to be some disconnect between media and Yankee fans about Cashman is that when we talk to our contacts in the game, like other GMs, they speak of Cashman as one of the greatest executives in the history of the sport. That's how his peers look at him. Up there with Branch Rickey and Pat Gillick and John Sherholtz. And I mean, he is on the Mount Rushmore of Hall of Fame GMs. So I'm saying that's what we hear. That's how Billy Beane or anyone would talk about Cashman, Theo Epstein. So then when it gets into like, why does the media? I'm trying to like kind of deconstruct this a little bit. When it gets into Yankee fans going, why is the media seemingly protect Cashman when we're so mad and da da da? I think maybe part of it is we're hearing from people who know more baseball than we do this unbelievable reverence for Brian Cashman as a GM from his peers. So that sort of forms our perspective a little bit.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think they have such a reverence for him?
Because they know how hard it is to have a winning season. So to look at 30 is, I mean, I know he wasn't the GM in '93, but he was really in the inner circle by then. They look at that with awe and reverence. They look at the fact that he works in a market where you can never tank. One of the easiest jobs in sports is being a GM for a team that doesn't have to win for 5 years. Other GMs look at that and they go, he doesn't have that luxury. They look at the championships. I mean, the fact that he does have those championships, and they look at it and they say, well, Bob Watson, well, Gene Michael. It's like by the early 90s, Cashman was part of the very small circle of Gene Michael's front office. So his competitors know that. And they also look at things like how difficult he is to deal with on trades. They respect how honest he is and stand up in their view and dealing with him. Yeah. So there's a personal component to that too. He's highly respected as a person. But the work that he does, those are some of the reasons. It's the market. It's the streak of winning. It's the championships. It's the lack of ability to rebuild. It's the fan and media pressure that are unique to New York. And all those things that he's navigated. That's why we hear in doing our work and talking to baseball sources this high level of, as I said, reverence for Brian Cashman.
And I have to,
just something I'm reporting back to you, not I'm expressing
sure.
my own opinion.
And I think there's a lot of, you have to put a lot of weight into those opinions from those people who are experts in that field. I look at so ahead of this trade deadline, we called it, this is Brian Cashman's most important trade deadline because the team was having such a good first half, but they did also have glaring holes that needed to be filled. And we thought at the deadline they did address those. Benintendi was a fantastic acquisition for left field. Thought Montas was a good addition to the starting rotation. Those were the two number one and two things. He also got some bullpen arms to deal with some injuries and et cetera. So far, those moves have not worked out for one reason or the other. You can't blame Cashman for Benintendi's injury, but like, if we are going to judge this season and what Cashman did with a championship caliber roster at the midway point to where it is now and where it might end up, the criticisms have to be fair, especially when you look at his history of trying to acquire starting pitching. And it's not a really good history. It's really bad. We've gone through it. It's pretty bad. He cannot acquire starting pitching.
Well, I agree that it's at the deadline. I'm with you that I thought they had a really good deadline. So then it becomes harder to feel credible criticizing in retrospect. I will say that they really made almost all the right moves in the moment. First of all, Efros was one of those really clever Clay Holmes type pickups and still might be. And then his shoulder hurt. Like, well, that's just bad. That's bad luck. Or maybe there's a way to have known that ahead of time. I don't know. But that was a guy they were on all year as one of their pro scouts and their analytics guys working together on targeting some of these relievers. This is one of the things they're really good at. That was good. Benintendi, obviously, terrific pickup. Didn't perform. Got hurt. Who could have seen those things coming? Not me. So it's tough to judge. But the one thing that I felt in retrospect, my own personal opinion, a little bit hesitant on, like, my own praise for them. Once I saw Castillo pitch against Cole in that game in Seattle, I was like, oh man. I knew he was a dude already, but I'm like, that's the guy. And I understand it probably would have cost them Volpe and Peraza. So you could make the argument that they shouldn't have done that. That's subjective. I was talking to his scout who covers the Yankees in Somerset. I was in Somerset after the trade deadline, and the scout was like, I would have traded Volpe and Peraza for Castillo. I mean, are you trying to win the World Series or not? That's just like a philosophical thing. I really like Peraza, by the way, what I've seen since he's been up. He looks like he's cool. And I've seen Volpe in Somerset this year. Like, these guys are good, I think. But I don't know. Castillo and Cole at the top of the rotation, that would have helped you win a World Series.
Sure. And
so that's the one where I was like, Montas is a pretty big drop off from Castillo, and that one I question a little.
especially when you start to dive into the Montas trade a little bit more and you look at, okay, he's coming off a shoulder injury and there's certainly risk acquiring. We went back into some quotes that Boone made right after the trade, and he kind of alluded to, like, oh, the one hiccup could be he's got a shoulder thing going on. They were very vague on it.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, if Castillo was your plan A and the price was too high and then you moved on to your plan B, but your plan B is got so many red flags, it's like, well, then that's not a very good plan B.
Well,
And
there's
then,
no one else out there, right? I mean, I agree. I think that there's a thought that Oakland rushed Montas back a little early from the IL in order to trade him. Do I still have Andrew?
yeah.
Okay, your video dropped out. Sorry, I'll start that again. There's a thought that Oakland might have rushed Montas back from the IL a little early in order to be able to trade him, and that he was still working through that when he got to the Yankees, and that's a good pickup on Boone talking about that, or seeming to reference that. They were in a weird spot once they felt that the price was too high on Castillo because Montas was the second best, I believe. I don't think I'm forgetting anybody. And so you knew you needed a pitcher. So it's like, all right, fine. And that's kind of where they ended up. I mean, he's good. Don't get me wrong. He's a guy they actually wanted in spring training. So it's not like a scrap heap or anything. But the shoulder did appear to affect him early on. And he there's been times where you're like, okay, he's starting to put it together as a Yankee, and then
Exactly.
goes backward a little bit, as you've seen. So they don't have that lockdown number two for the playoffs that they kind of had hoped to acquire. They don't. I don't. You could argue whether they had the lockdown number one, but that's a different
That was
conversation.
going to be my question. Do they have a lockdown number one? Because as good as Garrett Cole's numbers are, I don't know how many times I have to watch him give up home runs to the Red Sox or give
Yeah.
up home runs to the Astros or I mean, he gave up 6 home runs to the Twins earlier this year. And it's like, I know he's their number one pitcher. I know he's one of the best pitchers in baseball. I know he's going to be starting game one of the playoffs, whoever they're playing. But I don't have that same feeling I used to have, like, say, when Sabathia was starting a playoff game in 2009.
I think that Cole's one of the most intelligent, thoughtful pitchers I've ever covered, and that gets in his way sometimes. He knows when he's making a big start. He knows so much about other pitcher or other hitters' tendencies and weaknesses that sometimes he's like, okay, if I throw him a change up here, if I do this there, his swing path, da da da. It's like, nah, dude, you're Garrett Cole. Throw him the fucking cheese. You know, it's like he just
Right.
overthinks sometimes, and it's a delight as a writer covering him. I've never met a pitcher who's better to interview about pitching.
Interesting.
But I remember after that, remember the game? I think he gave up 6 runs in the first inning. I must have talked to him for 25 minutes
Yeah.
after that game, analyzing
Yeah.
every single pitch. Like, oh, if Suarez hadn't been sitting slider, he would have done this. So I should have thrown him the fastball. And then I can't believe I threw Kelnick a changeup. And sometimes you think his stuff is too good for him to have to worry that much and think that much. So yeah,
Yeah.
the potential's always there for him to be that dominant, one of the very best pitchers in baseball, the ace that they need in the playoffs. But I think we have to see it, obviously, after what happened in Fenway in the wild card game last year. And those are the things that I think that thoughtfulness is part of what makes him great, and it's part of what gets in his way sometimes. And that's what I think he has to manage.
I want to switch gears to Judge. Do you think so? What do you consider the home run record?
You know, I know this is out of step with my generation, but I mean, the home run record's 73. That's what's in the books. But I think
Yeah.
that like using steroids is significant. So I don't know what's the home run record. I think the home run record idea of it is that.
So what I think Judge will get to 62. You know,
Mhm.
he'll hit 64, 66, whatever it is. Do you think that's going to be a big deal around baseball, or is it because 73 is the record that, or seven? Is it 72? See, this is the problem.
73.
I don't.
Exactly. The
I
fact that you don't know kind of makes my point, right?
I legitimately do not know 72 or 73. Like, gun to my head, I don't know. I'm flipping a coin, and that's the problem. I also don't know how many home runs Bonds ended up with in his career. It's 770 something, right, or 780 something. I have no clue.
Something. The fact that we don't know, I obviously Hank Aaron and Babe Ruth and Roger Maris, those numbers are seared into your brain, so
Yeah.
that kind of answers the question, right?
Right, but I also know that, and even Judge said this, like the record book says 73. So if he hits 66, he's not going to be number one in the record book. But how do you think it will be talked about around baseball? Because 60 home runs still has barely ever happened. And if you remove those seasons of McGuire and
Yeah.
Sosa and Bonds, no one's done it since Roger Maris.
I think it'll be talked about as a major accomplishment, if not a record. I think it's cool that it's happening to a Yankee because the number 61 is obviously the bigger in Yankee lore at this point than anywhere else. So
Mm-hmm.
that's cool for baseball that it's a Yankee. That Roger Maris' son might be at Yankee Stadium, apparently unhappy, but still there when Judge potentially hits his 62nd. I think that's cool. But as far as how it means in the rest of the game, I think that people think he's the best home run hitter right now and an amazing player all around, great hitter. And I don't think that it goes that much further than that because, the record is 73. I think it leads to these irresolvable debates that depend on what one thinks about steroids and blah 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 ad nauseum. Like we're all bored with that discussion, but unfortunately, when people start to talk about this, that's the only place the discussion can go. So I think there's a little bit of that too that follows this thing with Judge through no fault of his.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking forward to the '66 Billy Crystal movie. That's gonna be a good one.
Well, he's found a way to milk it this far.
Right.
That'll probably happen. He's always around. He was narrating.
Yeah. Throughout the first pitch this year on opening day, delayed Garrett Cole. It's a whole big
Speaking of
thing.
things that rattle Garrett Cole, yeah, I think that it's really special though for Judge. And at ballpark when he hits 62, covering it, it feels like a big deal. Maybe just leave it at that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, obviously he's having his best season by far. Just he single-handedly carried the Yankees offense in the second half. I don't know where they would be without him. I know they still would not be in first place without Aaron Judge. I don't know why pitchers are still pitching to him. He's been that good. Is there going to be a market for him this offseason for like 10 years? Like, is a team going to give him 10 years and 38,
That's the
40
question.
million
I wish
a
I had
year?
the answer for you. I think that team would be making a bad gamble if they did it. If that's what it takes. If you're the Giants, say, and you're like the Yankees did with Cole, that's what it would take. As a team to have a mentality like, okay, whatever. What's it going to
Yeah.
take? We'll do it. We'll top all offers. There's no sense yet that a team like that has emerged for Judge. I think the era of analytical front offices makes it a little less likely because they all make perhaps more precise like risk calculations now, and they all kind of have the similar risk calculations. But if an owner gets involved and says we want to if the Johnson family in San Francisco says we want to make a big statement and do this, and if it's going to take 10 years, we'll do it, then that's what it's going to take. And then I don't think he'll be a Yankee.
Right. Because that was my next question. Like, I thought they offered him a fair contract before opening day. I didn't like how it all went down, that it happened on the morning of opening day, and then they held a press conference laying out exactly what the contract offer was. Like, come on, you had all of spring training to do this. Like, why are you doing this right before opening day? But I thought the numbers were fair. In hindsight, Judge bet on himself, and he bet right because he's having an all-world season. He's moved to center field when the team needed him to move to center field. That number needs to go higher. I do believe the Yankees will go higher than that number, but like I know they have a number in mind, and if it's less than what Judge wants, I think they're going to let him walk. Do you get that same feeling?
I certainly did. Rewind to opening day, and it felt like this had broken perfectly for the Yankees in that everyone knows we made him a fair offer, and he turned it down. We really tried. And if he'd had a typical Judge year, it's like, all right, sorry, someone else pay him in his 30s as he breaks down. I think that was the mentality. Now, so many things have gone in Judge's favor between, first and foremost, his performance, but also the fact that the Yankees look like a team, as recently as July, I can tell you for a fact, they were hoping to replace Judge with Soto for the next decade. That was like, oh, obviously you'd rather have Soto. Like, duh. That was, I think, what I was picking up from then. Obviously, that didn't work out. There's just a real trepidation, legitimately, for what that could mean for a player of that height. And some of the injury history is getting hit in the hand or whatever, but some of it is legit a concern. And so paying that guy to age. So it was sort of like set up perfectly for the Yankees to let him walk and look okay in doing it. Obviously, that's not a ways, as we've said. So many things have broken in Judge's direction. So I think that they'll go a lot further than they had previously been comfortable to keep him. I think that Hal Steinbrenner is conscious of fan perception as he should be. These are his customers. They're unhappy. They're booing him when he's on the field. I know that bothers him.
When he's giving money to charity, he's getting
I know.
booed, okay?
I know. Well, I was there. It was kind of like Hal Steinbrenner, boo, boo, boo. And then it was like, he's giving $222,000 to the foundation. It was like, okay. There was a little of that.
We'll stop booing
exactly.
to sip our beer
funny,
for this
actually.
2 seconds.
But I know that bothers him because he's human. So he's like,
sure.
You got to do something. Like, all right, fine. I'm keeping Cashman, but I'll keep Judge. You want me to do this? You want me to do that? Like, he's got to find something to please people. And I do think that as a human and as a businessman whose customers are unhappy right now, these are going to be factors with the Judge thing, and maybe they'll extend beyond what baseball ops would recommend as rational.
I think you have to. We kind of laid this out. It's like you've got Stanton through 2027. You have to trust, or I guess cross your fingers, Judge can play the outfield until then, and then you're paying him $38 million a year to be a DH.
And you could argue that the Yankees should just be able to eat the last couple of years of a Judge deal if he's broken down. That's why you're the Yankees.
Yes, exactly. They're the Yankees. They're the same with the Dodgers. That's why the Dodgers are paying all this money for Freddie Freeman and for Mookie Betts and all of these guys. When you're that level of organization, you have the luxury of doing this. The Kansas City Royals cannot do this. Don't go down to their level and play on their level just because you want to be nice. Let me ask you a
question, though, as a fan, as a rational fan, which clearly you are, do you really think that
clearly
making Judge your highest paid player through his 30s is good for your roster construction and team and budget? Is that really what's good for the Yankees?
I mean, obviously, if you're just purely looking at this from a roster construction standpoint, no. But they've made 50 other decisions that are not good for a roster construction standpoint. And I'm not saying making one more bad decision, you might as well because you're pot committed. But what I do know is that if you do not re-sign Judge that next year, 2023, kiss it goodbye. You're not doing shit next year without Aaron Judge.
I hear that, and you're probably likely right. But I've also learned in covering this that so much changes in an off season. You could retool in a way that we don't foresee that where you could be pretty good. I mean, but yeah, sure. Obviously, like the way this year's played out, you need him next year too. So yeah, I hear you. I'm not saying I wouldn't sign him. I'm just was wondering what you thought about that because it obviously comes with a lot of risk. Like if he'd hit 37 home runs this year and hit the IL with a hamstring or a quad or something, do you still want him? Because that's most other years.
I still want him at the contract that they offered him on opening day. And I think if he spent a month and a half on the IL this year, he's probably signing that contract in the offseason. I'd be okay with it.
Okay.
But now,
I would agree.
But now he's dovetailing into our last conversation. I know you're not on the Judge MVP train. I know you wrote something last week about Shohei Ohtani, which I completely understand. Shohei Ohtani is the best player in baseball, considering he does pitch and hit. But I think Judge is the MVP because of the importance. I'm one of these people that believes the MVP should be to an importance of a winning team, and I understand not everyone believes that. So I just see what Judge has done for this team this year, and I know what it would be without it, and they would be passed by probably Baltimore at this point.
No argument there on Judge's value to the Yankees. The first thing that I feel that I need to say about MVP is I really truly believe that the award should not exist. It doesn't have any definition, which leads to these debates. It's like, well, it has to be for a winning team. No, it doesn't. It has to be WAR. It has to be this. It has to be that. And no one's right and no one's wrong because valuable is nebulous.
Right.
And I've never voted and I've literally passed up every opportunity as a BBWA member to vote for it. Like, I don't want any part of it. And so I wrote about the Ohtani Judge thing a little tongue in cheek, like just because I was bored that day or something. I don't know. But I still believe what I said. Like if the award has to exist, I just feel that the last 2 years of Shohei Ohtani have been the best seasons in the history of the game by any player for the simple reason that no one's ever done both jobs. And if you look at the game, it's not just the day you perform. I don't understand how it works because I see in the clubhouses pregame the amount of work that the hitters do to prepare and the amount of work that the pitchers do to prepare. Like the pitchers have a 4-day routine of throwing and working with the pitching coach and refining whatever didn't work in their last start and doing all the work to get ready for their next start with their bodies and their minds and their repertoire. And the hitters are looking at video all the time and studying the opposing pitchers. And there's not enough time in the day to do both things. It's insane. And the fact is that Ted Williams and Babe Ruth and Ken Griffey Jr. and Willie Mays and none of these guys ever attempted it. And obviously Babe Ruth not doing it at the same time is what I mean. So I just don't see how in the space that he's doing these things well. Okay, I'm watching MLB Network late last night, and there's the crawl of the league leaders, and Ohtani's in the top 5 in ERA and RBI. Jesus Christ.
You're right. I cannot argue with it. You look at his numbers on the offensive.
Excuse me, strikeouts and RBI, but you take my point. Go on.
You look at his numbers on the offensive side, and you're like, that's one of the best offensive players in baseball. Then you look at his numbers on the pitching side. That's one of the best starting pitchers in baseball. There's no arguing with that.
And there's no arguing with Judge's value to the Yankees. One of the reasons I don't like these awards is because it forces you. It's a binary choice. It forces you to put someone else down, and I have nothing but praise for what Judge has done this year.
Yeah, they're never getting rid of the MVP award or the Cy Young award. I mean, the Cy Young award, though, has a much more clear definition. It is who is the best pitcher statistically. It doesn't matter if he's on – when Felix Hernandez won for the Mariners with like a losing record. Didn't he win? Like finally the voters recognized like, oh, you're on a crappy team and you don't have a winning record, but you lead in every other category. Statistically, you were the best pitcher. So that has a much more clear definition. So do you think they need to institute like another award that's more clear for hitters? Like I've always said, give the Babe Ruth Offensive Player Award.
Yeah, for sure. I think that would be better. I think there's a lot of problematic things about the award. I think when this is the problem with the Cy Young too, when BBWA voting, also, this isn't your question, but it correlates to contract incentives on a lot of players. Julio Rodriguez's contract has significant money attached to MVP finishes. Right. So if I'm covering the Mariners, and I'm around him every day, my vote for MVP impacts him financially. That's not a good thing. There's a lot wrong with it, but yes, none of it's going anywhere, including MVP. But if you're going to reform the system instead of blow it up, I think it should be the best player award or the best hitter award rather than valuable. Because all you end up doing is, as I said, it should be for a winning team. No, it shouldn't. End of discussion. Like where you go from there. It's just
so we can talk about the world ending, like you brought up earlier. No, you make such a good point about having guys' contracts being tied to MVP voting.
It's terrible.
That kind of just clicked in my head how asinine.
Think about that. Like, I could blackmail Julio Rodriguez if I covered them. You better sign this jersey for my kid, or else I'm not going to vote for you for MVP. Wait, you want that $500,000? I mean, I'm not saying writers do this, but it.
No, I know, but like it leaves open that possibility, even if it's a remote possibility. But like, I don't. The voting, as we've just established, is subjective, and so like contracts,
incentives,
milestone. What incentives should not be subjective? They should be okay, black or white. You achieved this or you didn't. Like it's wow, yeah. That's kind of crazy.
There's a similar thing with war on that, by the way, things to war, and the thing because war, the formula for that evolves. And everyone believes that it overvalues defense, and teams use more sophisticated stats in war. So I'm surprised that war is being used for financial things as well. Exactly.
And it's different depending on the website you're looking at. So it's crazy. All right, that's going to wrap it up. Andy, thank you so much for joining me. I always have a great time talking baseball with you.
This is always fun to come on. Anytime you guys ask, I'm happy to do it because it's always good talking to you guys as well.